Questions, resuming debate, reprise débat. The honourable member for Calgary Confederation.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is my pleasure to rise today to speak to motion M174, which has been brought forward by the member from Timmins, James Bay. The motion suggests that the government establish a national suicide prevention action plan with numerous provisions such as setting up culturally appropriate community-based suicide prevention programs, conducting analysis on a long list of subjects relating to suicide, and the motion also includes an annual reporting requirement to Parliament of implementation and progress. Madam Speaker, suicide. It is a word that has carried with it so much shame and stigma throughout human history. It is a topic we tend not to discuss, to acknowledge, or to deal with. It claims more lives annually than other more openly discussed issues such as motor vehicle collisions, homicides, or industrial accidents. Its relative absence from our common vocabulary speaks volumes. How many obituaries fail to acknowledge suicide as the cause of death? How many suicides get reported in the media? Not many, Madam Speaker, and perhaps because it is our fear of it, our inability to fully comprehend it. People who die by suicide or attempt suicide usually feel overwhelmed, hopeless, helpless, desperate, and alone. In more recent times, we as a society have opened up the discussion about mental health, but we do have a long way to go. Madam Speaker, just a few weeks ago, my hometown of Calgary was rocked by a suicide that was reported by media outlets due to the shock and sadness stemming from it. It was a suicide of a 9-year-old girl. A 9-year-old girl. Our community was stunned. How does a 9-year-old girl come to this decision? It's something we just cannot imagine. When this young girl, Amal Ash-Shatiwi, took her life, we all wanted answers. Why? What would bring her to this point? Many of us believe such a course of action isn't even within the realm of a 9-year-old girl's thinking. It is something parents of young children want to believe isn't even possible. It turns out that her story is not a new one. She was bullied in school, bullied to the breaking point. As a Syrian refugee, Amal, I suspect, already faced a lifetime of adversity just to be able to go to school. It should have got better coming to Canada, not worse. There are media reports that her bullying went unnoticed by teachers, not because it was done in dark corners, but because it was done in her native language, out in the open. This just highlights just another complexity in dealing with such situations. Amal's name translates into hope, and I know that this motion has been brought forward to Parliament in that spirit of hope. I know the member from Timmins, James Bay is hoping to address the rampant rates of suicide among the Indigenous communities in his riding and across Canada. Sadly, youth suicide is a large problem within these communities, within so many communities. We hope that we can make progress in addressing the root causes of suicide. Once identified, we need to address the problems to reduce our suicide rates in Canada. As I read through this motion, and I suspect most others would find little to disagree with. Suicide is a big problem. We don't talk about it, so people don't realize how big the problem really is. I recall talking to a police officer in Edmonton back when I was at the Alberta legislature, and he said to me that there was, on average, of one jumper off the high-level bridge in Edmonton per week. He said it was a place for people in Edmonton to go when they're finally ready to kill themselves. One per week. Never reported, of course, in the media. It was a shock to me, the high numbers, and I'm sure it is a shock to many of us here. The city has since built, of course, a suicide barrier on that bridge, but more needs to be done than building the infrastructure. Every day in Canada, 10 people die of suicide, and 200 others will attempt to take their lives. If that many people a day died in plane crashes, Canadians would be up in arms, demanding government take more action. However, when 10 people die every day in Canada of suicide, when their cause of death is often unmentioned, when their cause of death is not up for discussion, then it is destined to continue. Suicide is one of the top 10 causes of death in Canada, and much of it is preventable. Men are at a much higher risk. Well, sort of. Men are 3 times more likely than women to die from suicide. However, women are 3 times more likely to attempt suicide. And no community is immune from suicide. From the most remote communities in Canada to the busiest downtown street, suicide knows no bounds. The causes are similar as much as they are different. However, the resources to address mental health issues varies widely from our biggest cities to our smallest communities, from one province to another, from one city to another. Like much of our national healthcare system, your outcomes will vary greatly depending on where you live, and I believe that that is just not right. Throughout Canada, there is already calls for more mental health funding, and this motion repeats that call. Throughout Canada, there are already calls for better, more culturally appropriate education and prevention programs, and this motion repeats that call. And I can go on, but my point is that this motion does not call for anything that we have already not heard before. And I do plan to support this motion because I do not oppose any of its calls to action, calls often heard before. We certainly need to do something more than what we are doing now. And I'm sure that we all here do know of someone who committed suicide. Many just don't talk about it. We all know someone who tried to commit suicide, but we just don't talk about it. We all know more needs to be done to prevent and treat suicide. We just don't talk about it. And this has to change, and that is why I am very happy that we are discussing this here today. And I want those who need help to reach out for it, to demand it. I especially want kids to get the help that they need. The Kids Help phone line is a fantastic resource for young people needing to talk to someone. 1-800-668-6868. All parents should post this number conveniently in their house and speak to their children about it. It could make the world of difference later. Again, I will be supporting this motion anytime that we can discuss and support mental health issues and initiatives, anytime that there are efforts to raise awareness and remove the stigma surrounding mental health issues. I truly believe then that we are helping those in need. We just need to do more than talk. We need action. I want to also express my sincere condolences to the member from Flamborough-Glanbrook for your great loss, honourable member. Through the Speaker, thank you.